said, this is wrong. It should not be done, but it was done. And so the American Revolution took place, and the 13 colonies left the British system. That didn't end the fighting that was going on between the United States and the rights of the desire for the rights of Englishmen and what was happening in England itself. And it raises some very intriguing issues as to what happened at that time. When one looks, one sees that in France, they were seized upon getting rid of the absolute monarchy and the domination by the clergy. So they had their French Revolution, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen, written in 1789. So we're dealing here within the decade after the American Revolution. The Americans, of course, came to the aid of the French in that struggle against the British, to the aid of the French by supplying goods. The British didn't like this because it allowed the Americans to begin to take the trade that the British wanted to protect. The terror ensued in France. There were some atrocities committed, real atrocities. Napoleon took over, and then one had, with Britain, the Napoleonic Wars that stretched until 1815. We had a small skirmish involved in that, which we call the War of 1812, which really wasn't a war between Canada and the United States. It was a war between Britain and France. America was on the side of the French, and of course we in Canada were forced to be on the side of the British. So a big struggle ensued, but the Americans saw an opportunity here. Would not the Canadians want the rights of Englishmen? They have been denied. I'm going to put a bit of context here. The British policies in America were being enforced by the governors. These were truly abusive policies. They were denying Americans the rights of Englishmen. As a result of the American Revolution, those oppressive governors were driven to Canada. They came here, and we call them the United Empire Loyalists. They established, in their own way, a new control, the Family Compact and the Shadow Clique, a domination by an elite that denied citizens their rights. So now, in the 1812 period, America, during the Napoleonic Wars in England and France, said, why don't we try to get the Canadians to also seek the rights of Englishmen? Remember, in Quebec, they still had the remnants of the Ancien Regime, inherited to some extent from 1759. In France, that was gone. The clergy was gone. But the British, seeing the threat, went to the priests in the pulpits in Quebec and said, we will give you privileges on the condition that you preach from the pulpit the control of the English government and support. And the population agreed. So what happened in Canada following the War of 1812 was that we had a system that was dominated by the Family Compact, the Shadow Clique, and the clergy. The remnants of the Ancien Regime in France that had been thrown out by the French Revolution, and of the domination of the 13 colonies by England following the 7 Years' War. The worst thing you could possibly imagine. The most control, the most power in the hands of the few. There were two rebellions against this in 1837. Joseph Louis Papineau and William Lyon Mackenzie. These rebellions were squashed completely. And so the power of the elites was maintained. Yes, there were token legislatures established. Yes, they had slightly more power. But these were not legislatures of the people. These were controlled by the partisans. They were controlled by the parties in a way that allowed them to impose their partisan will in the place of law, in a way that could not happen in any other British territory, former British territory. When we look at what we have inherited in 1867, contrary, I would say, to some degree to what John says, what this did was to entrench the power of the elites. It was to reinforce the notion that Parliament is not a place for our representatives, but in fact, it's a place for the toadies of the party who pretend they are representing us while the elites impose their will. And today, if you were to ask most Canadians, they would believe that those in Parliament make our laws. In fact, what we are acceding to in accepting that view is that whoever is elected, whoever controls those who are elected, have the right to turn their partisan policies into the laws of the land. That notion has no place in the British heritage of government and law. That heritage grants us rights, God-given rights, natural rights that belong to us, and governments are entrusted with upholding them. When one comes to the Charter, what we see is the entrenchment of that European-style notion that rights are given. That notion that is inherent in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They are given by governments. They are given by those who control us. They don't belong to us by virtue of the fact that we are valued human beings. Now, I'm going to wrap up here pretty soon. So much I will skip over. What I would say is, if one looked now at what happened in England in 1215, we see that King John was forced to sit down and to make some reflection, some recognition of these pre-existing laws which he had a duty to uphold. If King John were to come here now and see what our governments of the day do, where they willfully invent statutes that turn their partisan policies into law and displace our rights and our fundamental freedoms, one can be sure that King John would say in amazement, "And you made me sign the Magna Carta? Look what you guys are doing now." It's time that we begin to think about and to grasp the essential principles on which we stand. It's totally unacceptable that we accept a charter that ends up by saying we must now determine the basic beliefs, values, and principles that unite us. And I will close by saying this is not simply a failing of those in the Liberal Party. In 1995, following the Quebec referendum, I attended a speech by Joe Clark at Carleton University. Joe? Yes. His view is deeply held by many who vote conservative. There are many who see themselves as compassionate conservatives, as benevolent conservatives. But it is held, and it is an important belief. I asked him at the end of his speech, which was encouraging us to be far more welcoming to French Canadians, to send our children to Quebec for the summers, to have French Canadian Quebecers move across the country for the summer. And I asked him at the end, he was urging to, of course, as you know, he was the Constitutional Affairs Minister. He's the one who, with the provincial people and all of the federal and provincial staff, concocted the Charlottetown Accord that John spoke of as well. I asked him, what were the basic beliefs, values, and principles that you saw in the Charlottetown Accord that you felt united us as Canadians and that we had to protect? His answer was, very quick, we're not American and we tolerate everything else. I pressed a bit and I said, well, that doesn't sound to be an awful solid foundation upon which to base your country. We don't like them and we like everybody else. What is it that we have? What do people come here to find, to support? He stumbled and bumbled 3 times, beginning answers, and then stopped. At the end of those, he said, I have got myself in trouble before by giving answers to questions that I have not thought about. I spoke to her afterwards. I will say he went on to the next question very quickly. And I don't think he heard the next question, and he started to give a bit of an answer. And then he bumbled back to me with some more nonsense. I spoke to him afterwards, and I said, I think it's a disgrace that one would try to impose a constitution without having given even enough thought to that question. You and your provincial counterparts and all of the bureaucrats, federally and provincially, who work with you, not even enough to be able to give a brush-off answer. I would contend that we have not spent enough time thinking about the basic beliefs, values, and principles upon which we stand. I would maintain that thinking back, hearkening back to those old notions of God's law, of government of trust under law, are principles that we deserve to think about and to understand and see how they translate into our institutions. And I think until we do that, we would make a very grave mistake in trying to concoct our own great charter or our own replacement for Trudeau's very defective charter.
Yeah.
Thank you.